All right, I think we are going now. I see participants trickling in, so that means we are on our way. Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's a crazy time for all of us, I know, and so hopefully you are comfortable, maybe at home, and you have a little bit different schedule to accommodate this. But for those of you who are maybe taking time out of your day, your work day to do this, thank you for coming and spending some time with us. We're very happy to have with us Erin Robertson from Nature Sacred. And Erin, you'll have to forgive me, we started our correspondence, it's been a couple of months, so I can't remember why we first got in touch, but we did, and we thought this would be wonderful. So Nature Sacred is involved in creating sacred spaces in a way that sort of reclaims that space for sacrality in a way that maybe wouldn't be natural otherwise, that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I think that in the coming weeks and months, having the ability to create these spaces, either physically or in other ways, is only going to be more important. That's just sort of the moment that we're living in right now. So, sometimes our webinars, we just have a conversation right off the top. Other times there is sort of a presentation like this. So we've got a wonderful presentation here at the top. And Erin, I will let you take it away.
Okay, great. Well, I'm so glad to be with you all today. Again, I hope you all are happy and healthy in whatever area and situation you've found yourselves right now. And I don't know about you all, but I certainly have been making use of nearby accessible nature in a big way over the past week or so. And I imagine all of you hopefully have as well. So what we're going to talk about today is Nature Sacred, and a big part of that is accessible nearby nature spaces that are sacred to the users and the community. So I want to start with a little bit of history. Our co-founders are Kitty and Tom Stoner. They hail from rural Iowa, where they were sort of marinated in this beautiful bucolic nature setting. And their business took them to the Baltimore, DC area, and they were confronted with this. And this is an all too familiar view of city life that we are all pretty much accustomed to now. But they realized that there was a lack of quality, accessible nature for many urban dwellers in the United States that they hadn't necessarily realized before until they left Iowa. So it's important to think about how right now, especially right now in the times that we've found them ourselves, but certainly in the more recent times, there are communities that are really looking for ways to unify, to find community cohesion, and to address issues of crime and to improve public health. There's also a very clear message that our earth is sending to us right now. Our lands and our waterways are crying out for protection and for healing. And we at Nature Sacred feel that we're kind of at the intersection of this. And a big part of that is what you'll see here, which is that it's very important that we take care of our earth and our resources and our the species that we share this planet with. But right now, we really feel strongly that one of the most endangered species on this planet is the human. And it's the way of connecting humans back to nature that we're interested in, and making sure that that strong connection to nature is available to everyone, because we feel that that is a way to heal not only the humans, ourselves, but in turn that will help heal the planet. So our co-founders came up with the concept of open spaces, sacred places. These are sites that are not your typical recreation or ball field. They're really designed for community gathering and cohesion, and also for individual respite and reflection. We think of them as sanctuaries, really. There's a couple of guiding principles that are really important to our sites. One is that they be open. And part of that openness is not just that they're accessible to the public, but that they provide a welcoming atmosphere so that people feel comfortable coming into that space regardless of their religion, regardless of their race, regardless of where they are in their life and their experiences, that that space could become a sacred place to them. They're nearby and accessible, as we talked about. And then they are community-led spaces. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And that leads to this idea of sacredness. So over about a 20-year period, our foundation received about 1,000 or more requests for the creation of these types of spaces. And 130 grants were provided for sacred places designed through this collaborative community design process. They all start with a fire soul. A fire soul is a person or persons in a community that know that a nature space is needed, that it can be beneficial, and that fire soul lives, works, and cares for that community. They're really a part of that community, and in making them prominent in this process, the members of that community feel comfortable taking part in a design process. So we use 4 design elements in the process of design. They're portal, path, destination, and surround. These elements arose from many different charrettes over that 20-year period, where we realized that communities were really identifying these as elements of design that they wanted in their spaces. And what they do is create a sense of place. So when you walk through a portal, whether it be this sort of brick archway that you see here, or a wooden pergola, or even 2 big stones that you're walking through, what you do is you walk into a place. You know you've entered something. A sense of surround creates that feeling of sanctuary and separation from an urban environment. And the path and the destination let you know that you're on a journey to respite and reflection. So these are some real life examples of our design elements. And the visioning process is done with a landscape architect and the fire soul working in tandem to lead the community through this visioning of those design elements. Because the community has identified what is important to them, because the end users of the site and the people that we want to make use of that space have been given a platform to talk about what's important to them and their vision. Therefore, those spaces become sacred to them. And what we've noticed is because of that, because those spaces are sacred, that the stewardship of those sites, the care for those sites, have been enhanced greatly. So this is just some examples of our sites. This is a labyrinth and healing garden at Hopkins Bayview in Baltimore. This is a garden at Maryland Correctional Institute in Jessup, Maryland.
Wow.
Yeah, this is Amazing Port Street Garden. This is a really special place connected to Amazing Grace Lutheran Church in McElderry Park in Baltimore. What you see is this beautiful stone labyrinth with our bench in the background and a mural. But what it used to be was an open air drug market, what's called a needle park in Baltimore. And the fire soul there knew that she wanted to claim this space for the youth and for the families in her parish, in her church. And she wanted to make sure that the drug users and drug dealers knew that it was for them. So they created this beautiful labyrinth, and she walked that labyrinth every day until the drug dealers moved on and realized that this was a place of sanctuary and a sacred place, and realized what its intended use was for. So this is a rooftop garden. This is on the top of a building in downtown DC, the American Psychological Association. And this is not just a labyrinth. I think it's still the only rooftop labyrinth in the United States, but it's also a stormwater retention space, and it's filtering about 40,000 gallons of rainwater per year. So lots of dual effort with this space. This is Crispus Attucks Park in DC, which used to be a Pepco utility plant and dumping ground. And the community there removed all of the trash and refuse that was in this space and created a beautiful sanctuary. This is Choose Life Memorial Garden. This is in the Sandtown Winchester neighborhood of Baltimore. So this is where Freddie Gray is from. And if you'll remember the unfortunate events of Freddie Gray and the riots in Baltimore's recent past, I think it's important to note the importance of a community design space, especially with this one. Since the community was a part of designing this space, and since they were so active in the ownership and the stewardship of this space, our fire soul at Choose Life Memorial Garden called me after the riots in Baltimore. Well, I called him actually to check in, and he told me that a lot of the places that he usually goes to, his coffee shop, his local drugstore, were burned or looted, or things had happened to them. But what he told me was that there was not a footprint in the Choose Life Memorial Garden. The community knew what that space was for, and even the people who were involved in the riots did not vandalize or do anything destructive to this garden space, because it was so important to them and because it was for them to find sanctuary and respite. But what they did do was gather at that space after those tragic events and reflect and heal together. So in each one of our spaces is this bench. It's a bench for respite and reflection. It can seat about 4 to 6 people comfortably, or just one. And it's a place for you to sit down and be kind of marinated in the nature experience of each site. So underneath the bench, as you saw the gentleman before was writing in a journal, underneath each bench is a waterproof journal for people to record their thoughts. This is a journal doodle from University of Maryland College Park. And what we noticed over this 20-year period of collecting these journal entries was that there was some really compelling anecdotal evidence that people were being truly healed and finding wellness in these spaces. So our foundation decided, our board directed us to really go out and embark on a program of research that would back this up with some evidence-based research. So we launched the Nature Sacred Awards program in 2013, which combined site design and research teams that would do what, help to prove what we already knew to be true, which was that nature could be healing and provide wellness to individuals and communities. So the sites of these research teams were chosen specifically because the communities were experiencing some acute or chronic stress and trauma. So as in this case, this was the site of the devastating tornado in Joplin, Missouri. And we helped create the butterfly garden and overlook there. This is outside of an ICU unit in Legacy Hospital in Portland, Oregon. And a nature place was born. The Brooklyn Navy Yard was long closed off to its residents after the community realized that it was actually a burial ground. And Naval Cemetery and Landscape was created as a place for the community to come, but also you'll see that boardwalk around was so that they would not disturb that sacred ground. Hurricane Sandy did some devastating damage to Queens, New York, especially a community in Beach 41st Street. And we helped create this gathering spot and community garden there. And when our wounded warriors come home to Walter Reed, they're often treated in this type of environment. But they're now given another place to heal called the Green Road. So I'm going to try to do a video. If it works, I hope it will. If it doesn't, we can send these links to everybody afterwards.
Of course.
But this is about this is a video that we did on our site in Joplin, Missouri. Are you all able to see it? Is it working?
We've got there's no progress on the.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we skip the video and that'll be good. That'll leave more room for questions, and I will share these links because they are powerful stories of the communities that came together there. So anyway, after that Nature Sacred Awards program wrapped up, or was wrapping up in 2017, we embarked upon the Nature Sacred program. Our board and our co-founders asked us to go back to those 130 grants that were done to our sites and do some assessment of what was going on there, if they were still in existence. Hopefully most were not paved over into parking lots, and really figure out what was going on with them and to try to support them. So what we found was that many were still thriving, still serving their communities, and that these fire souls were still a part of these projects and still inviting the community to take part in the space and its stewardship. So what we did was create what we call the Nature Sacred Network of these 100+ sacred places and their fire souls, and gave them an opportunity to connect with each other and to share resources. We also provide enrichment and programmatic support to our sites. We noticed that those that were most successful in the maintenance and the stewardship were having this sort of constant invitation for the community to come into the space and to use the space. So we provide funding support for programs and events that go on in these spaces. You'll see there's a story time, a mobile story time up in the top left there. Yoga is a very popular program in many of our spaces. And then we did a step dance tour through our Baltimore sites last year. So what we also did in the past year or two is really hone in on the best process for our benches. So originally these benches were constructed from picklebatt wood. So you'll see the kind of rounded top of that bench is kind of an ode to a picklebatt. But eventually Vlasic started using metal vats, not wood, and we ran out of pickle wood. And we wanted to source our wood from something that was meaningful. So we work with a group called Brick and Board out of Baltimore. Their parent company is Humanum. And what they do is go into the row homes of Baltimore that are set to be demolished and landfilled, and they source all the materials that they can from them. And part of what they source are these huge joists, wooden joists, that are holding up these row homes in Baltimore. So our wood for our benches is now sourced from those joists. That wood is sent up to Western Correctional Institute in Cumberland, Maryland. Their sacred place is on the bottom left there, probably one of our most beautiful gardens. It's obviously a prison garden, and their wood shop constructs the benches there. Those benches, if they're going into a Baltimore site, are sent out to the League for People with Disabilities, and one of their youth workforce development programs has the task of installing those benches in Baltimore and caring for them. So you'll see that their Renew Crew is what they refer to themselves as. That's on the top right there. And it's a really special circular social impact element to the work that we do. And one of the things that's important to us is Brick and Board actually has a mandate to hire those with barriers to entry to the workforce, which are typically returning citizens. So obviously that connection with Western Correctional Institute, Brick and Board, and then again serving one of our grantees, the League for People with Disabilities, as well through a programmatic endeavor is really important to us. So we've talked a little bit about how we embarked on this research program and what we feel to be true, that nature is healing and brings wellness to communities. But what we did last year was kind of put this on a larger scale, and we released a report with a physician researcher out of Philadelphia, who's been doing some really groundbreaking research on community greening and how it affects physical and mental health of residents. So I will provide you all with this. This is on our website, naturesacred.org, and I can send a link as well. But this is a really nicely designed and sort of succinct report on all of the best research about how nature can be healing. So just to give you an example, nature can provide wellness in the form of mental fatigue, decreased feelings of loneliness. It has cardiometabolic results as well. If you spend a certain amount of time in nature, your cardiometabolic results are much stronger. It can also mitigate violence and crime. And again, all of that is kind of tidied up into this report, which I, as a researcher, am able to digest. So we're trying to provide that as a service to what we like to think of as aspiring fire souls, those that are looking to advocate for these types of spaces. And again, we've used our website as a tool here. So this is just a snapshot of what our website provides also. We've boiled down this research into impact areas and fast facts. We have a lot of video and blog posts that can help communicate this. And we're really looking to kind of be this bridge between the great research that's being done on nature and its healing powers and putting that into practice. So I am really excited to hear from you all if you have any questions or thoughts. But I really, again, I just appreciate so much you all taking the time to hear what Nature Sacred is all about.
Yeah, we do have a number of questions that came in during the presentation, and thank you. This is wonderful. Seeing the process from start to finish is so fascinating. And I have a couple of questions of my own, but this first question, you have answered it a little bit, but it has to do with this image that's on the screen right now, the labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that fit into sort of the genesis of Nature Sacred? Was it, did one community happen to want it and it became kind of a common theme, or where does that fit into all of this?
So we have about, I think we have 10 to 15 labyrinths in our spaces. So not every one of our spaces has labyrinths. What happened was one of our communities asked us to help them in the creation of a labyrinth, and that kind of spawned this. And again, we are here to provide the best resources and design process to leverage what the community wants. So
sure.
They want a labyrinth, or another design element, we're here to help them make that come to life. But the labyrinth itself is something that a lot of our communities are interested in because it brings this sort of mindfulness and respite and reflection, and it's a form of meditation, and it's also an interfaith method. So again, it's welcoming to people of all faiths. But I will tell you a quick story about labyrinths because it's just too good not to share. We had a labyrinth space at a AIDS clinic in DC, Whitman Walker Clinic, and thankfully the clinic was no longer needed when the AIDS epidemic was somewhat mitigated, and so it closed down. And the users of that space asked to keep the labyrinth for another site. They didn't want it to go away because so much healing and so many good things had happened in that space. So the labyrinth was taken apart stone by stone and stored for a couple of years until actually Arlington Parks and Rec found a great spot for the labyrinth. And then the labyrinth stones were taken out of storage and put exactly where they used to be in Whitman Walker Clinic into this new park. Yeah. So it's just kind of a testament to, obviously how strongly communities feel about these spaces, but also how, how the labyrinth tool can be so helpful and such a big part of healing for people in an outdoor space. Yeah.
That actually flows very well into another question, which is, you showed a number of different types of spaces, and I'm sure that some of that is determined by what is actually available in terms of literally the space the community needs. But if you think about kind of a typology of spaces that you put in, do you notice any particular one or a couple of them that are more successful than others by some metric or more used, or is there a design that is more conducive to use than others maybe?
Sure. So yeah, our model is meant to be really flexible. So you'll see a lot of different types of spaces. So we've done sacred places in median strips of busy streets. We've done
Wow.
sacred places in street end parks. The space that you see here is a labyrinth at University of Maryland College Park, which is part of a much larger space that we created. But I would say what we've found to be the most successful is when there is that strong fire soul presence,
Mm-hmm.
and when there is some sort of institutional presence also sort of backing up that fire soul. And again, that can be a college, a hospital, it could be a very small nonprofit community group, a church, but just really, or even just a friends group. We've actually helped establish friends groups for parks.
Wow.
But again, it's just having some sort of like institutional presence behind the fire soul is very helpful.
Yeah.
Stewardship of these spaces.
And actually, there's a question that is specifically about colleges. If you could say a little bit more about maybe some examples of colleges that have done this, or whether
Sure.
it's kind of a growing thing. I'm assuming that that the person asking the question works in a university setting and would like to maybe pursue
Yeah.
something like this.
Okay, so sacred places in the college setting are extremely good tools for combating stress, loneliness, isolation, all of those mental health things that students are experiencing as they're going through the college experience. So the one you see here is at University of Maryland College Park. We also have one at UMBC in Baltimore County. And what we have noticed is, and in both cases, the students were actually involved in the design of the spaces.
Wow.
And what we have noticed is, number one, the journal entries are far and away the most prevalent in those spaces. They fill their books super quickly. And what is so wonderful to see is that in a college setting, a lot of what the journal entries are is this sort of call and response between users. So somebody will write in the journal, I'm stressed, I'm feeling, alone, I'm feeling desperate, all those really strong, like hard things that they're going through that they don't feel comfortable communicating maybe to their friends or their family, but they can write about in this sort of anonymous journal.
Right.
And other users will write back and say, even in the case of University of Maryland, we have like a very concrete case where somebody wrote back and said, I had the same problem last year. This is the counselor that I talked to on campus. She, in a sense, saved my life. Please go see her. And then the person, the original writer, wrote back, I went and saw her and it changed my life, or whatever it was. So it's really a strong, compelling way to make a sense of place for people that are feeling sort of out of their element.
Right.
It creates, the intention of the space is that anyone who enters it can feel it's their sacred place.
Yeah.
So to be able to give that experience to a college student is really valuable. And it's a great place to do programming. So this is where, this labyrinth is where University of Maryland students come and gather to do events and programming. It's also where they come to gather to do memorial services or after big events that have happened. It was designed actually because the students wanted to create a place sort of in memoriam of the Virginia Tech shooting.
Well, and this image that's on the screen right now, and all the images that you've shown, are these beautiful spaces that have been, remade to one extent or another to provide this function. But there's a question in here that I think is really interesting, especially if you have a community that is in need, like a higher ed community. If there are ways to bring the sacred to spaces that cannot be radically remade. There's a huge plot of land at the University of Maryland that we're looking at. That's a lot. That's a lot to work with. What about institutions or groups that don't have a piece of land to do anything with?
Yeah. So, we do have been seeing an uptick in vacant lot conversions. So typically, if you're in a dense urban area, almost every city in the United States has a plethora of vacant lots. And they're easily attained by community groups, friends groups, nonprofits. Usually the city is very happy to work with groups on acquiring that land. And so we do a lot of that work now too. The garden that you saw at the Choose Life Memorial Garden was sort of the night shot of the mural of trees in Sandtown, Winchester. That's a vacant lot. But we also work with groups we've worked with groups on land acquisition before. And again, the model is designed to be really flexible. So maybe a community has a larger piece of land, maybe they just have a very small, discrete part of land, but it can be, those design elements can work in any size of space, and they can also work with any budget. So
Sure.
Our sites have ranged from $5,000 to $10,000 to, $500,000 sites on the budget of the community and the budget of the site that's being created.
Well, and sometimes for a webinar like this, we try to stay out of the proverbial weeds, but some of these nitty-gritty questions are actually really helpful and useful.
Important.
And I want to take that point you just made and follow it up with another question that someone's asked, and that is about the kind of proverbial groundwork that needs to be laid before something like this can happen. It's sort of a long question, so I'll try to paraphrase to an extent. But what level of sort of advocacy or awareness or just publicity, I guess, has to be in place in a community for this to happen? Or is it something that Nature Sacred helps with from the very beginning? Or does it have to be kind of, here's the piece of land and we know what we want to do and now you all partner? What does that look like sort of from start to finish?
So it can happen both ways. So again, we're here to serve the needs of whatever community and wherever their starting point is. So if a community group has, decided that they think they want a nature place, they know that there's little to no access to nature for their community, and they want to provide that, but they haven't decided, where to put it or what space to use, we can help with that. If they already have a piece of land in mind, and sometimes it's even actually, a lot of times it's often just a fire soul coming to us and saying, I don't know where to start. I think this is important and I don't know where to start. And we can start from there. And then what we can do is, we've done this so many times that we have sort of practices for community engagement in general. So we can talk to a fire soul about who needs to take part in this process.
Sure.
And, as amazing and wonderful as these fire souls are and the place that they're coming from, a lot of times they only are looking at perhaps their small community. Right. And we help them branch out into like a larger community design process. So look beyond your church or your little nonprofit. Are there business owners in the community? What residents are there? Are there other nonprofits that maybe could take part in this? Because again, you're opening it up to this larger base of stewardship.
Sure. There is a question that you were mentioning that fire souls sort of come from lots of different places. And I think you sort of answered it, but let's make it explicit. Someone said, is there some kind of a starter kit to guide a fire soul? And I'm assuming the answer is just contact Nature Sacred and the conversation starts there.
Yep, they can just get in touch with us and we will help them. But we have boiled this down into sort of a how-to guide, sort of light toolkit on how to sacred place. And that is on our website as well. So if you go to our website and you go into the Get Started tab, there is a toolkit with a lot of resources at your disposal to do this on your own as well.
I'll put that in chat right now. So folks, if you look at the chat box, there's a link right there and that'll sort of get you started if you're interested in this. When you mentioned building that fantastic boardwalk around the burial ground that already existed, that it had been there for some time already. there's this great question here from a natural burial advocate who says that when you bring this up in an urban setting, it slams the conversation down. Nobody wants to think about, we have this vacant lot, let's make it a burial site. But I think this is a really interesting question. Has that ever come up in Nature Sacred's consultation? Is this something that has ever been considered as making a place sacred?
That it would become a burial ground or create
right. That would become one that does not already exist.
Yeah, I don't know that we have done that before. We have 3 or 4 cemetery sites, which are obviously the most sacred of sacred ground, if you will. And 3 of them actually were sort of unmarked burial grounds. So they were sites that were either enslaved individuals or sort of a pauper's grave situation, where the community, came to us in these more recent times and said, we want to make this what it really is, a sacred place.
Right.
But we have not done the flip side of that. But again, if that's needed and that's important, I will say one of our sites needed a place for homeless individuals that were needed a place for a pauper's grave for them to be buried, and that was connected to a church. So already kind of planned that, it was already in place, and we created a sacred place around that.
Sure. For those sites that might be either for sort of the anonymous graves of the poor, native burial grounds, enslaved persons, is there engagement with that within the space? Is there signage or anything that sort of says this is why this place was not noticed for so long, but now it is?
Absolutely. And that's a really important piece of the work that we do, which is bringing to light the story of a space and the story of a community. And that's, their part in the visioning process is designed to do that.
Sure.
But what it can also do is going through a garden design process.
Sure.
Start to bring disparate views together to let a truth be told, if you will. So we had a group recently contact us from Wacomico County in Maryland, where they have a sign at a courthouse or a historic courthouse that is sort of an ode to a Southern general from the Confederate Army. And they're looking to take that sign down and create a space that is more reflective of the community that is there now. So they are looking to use our process design to bring these disparate views together that they're dealing with on the eastern shore of Maryland, and to allow for some acknowledgement of the truth of the past in that space.
Well, in situations like that, you have many, many voices. It's very easy to see this as it's one side and the other, but I would imagine that that conversation is actually much more nuanced, and that design process has to take a lot of voices into account, which brings us to another question, which is, you have the fire soul in a community, you have nature sacred, and then you have kind of everybody else. What does the collaboration process look like in terms of community input? Is there a sort of a design and revision process, or is the entire process collaborative from the beginning? What does that look like?
Right. So I think the other sort of, the other part of a triangular approach in that is that there's the fire soul, there's nature sacred, and there's a design advisor, which is usually a landscape architect, sometimes an urban designer. So that individual is also really key in this process, because they are well versed in our case, since we've identified landscape architects that are good at this work, that are interested in this work, they're well versed in the community design process.
Yeah.
They work with the fire soul to really make this design come to life. The first charrette meeting, what we call a charrette meeting or a community visioning meeting, has no renderings, no sketches. It's just really about that community being able to share what they think the space should be. But what is really important is that they have these 4 design elements as guideposts. So they're not just given this sort of blank slate that's sometimes a little intimidating or can lead to sort of mayhem, if you will, in a design process. They have these four guiding design elements that help them sort of center their thoughts on the process. And then after that, the landscape architect can surface a sketch or a rendering, or sort of 3 to 4 typically sketches and renderings. And then the community can meet back again and say, okay, we like this part of this rendering, we don't like this part, we'd rather have it look like this. And so they are then given they can give their blessing of a final design.
Sure. You know, it occurs to me that after this process is complete and you have all these different people using it, different members of the original community, the community is growing, and especially, you know, you have the example, this fantastic example of the college students that had this kind of long-term back and forth through the journals that are kept there. And this is a great question. I'm a historian by training, so I want to know the answer to this too. What happens to those journals after they're filled up?
Yeah, so we love to get them from our files because, you know, it's rewarding for us to read how people are using the spaces and making, you know, having beneficial outcomes in the spaces. But also we can use them to help others advocate for these types of spaces. So we know that storytelling and anecdotes can be really powerful when you're looking to create a space and you're trying to acquire community, you know, input and community buy-in, and also when you're trying to acquire funding. So often our Fire Souls will send those journals to us. And so we have a collection in our office.
Wow.
Sometimes the Fire Souls feel really strongly about keeping those journals, which we understand. So they'll send us either phone pictures or scanned copies of the journal entries so that we can share them and they can keep them.
Sure.
And I will tell you, many Fire Souls are very disappointed when those journals walk away, when somebody takes them and, you know, takes them away from the site. We are okay with it. We kind of feel like if somebody's taking a sacred journal out of a bench, that maybe they need it, and so that's okay. And we go ahead and send them a new one. So we have blank journals that we send to Fire Souls on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's fantastic. A number of questions have come in about kind of the theory that undergirds all of this, and I want to respect those questions, but also sort of try to branch it out a little bit. You have the 4 principles that go into creating a sacred space. You have community input that sort of says, here's what our community actually needs. I'm wondering, is there an engagement with any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the bigger questions that various traditions might incorporate. Someone said, how do you incorporate something like feng shui? Someone said, what about ecopsychology or deep ecology? You know, there are any different number of ways that you could think about this, but is there ever kind of an abstract theoretical underpinning to all of this that guides some of the process? Or is it just what the community needs?
Well, I mean, we are here to serve what the community needs, but what our entire organization is grounded on is this belief that humans are meant to have a strong connection to nature.
Right.
That we are at our best when we are connected and are able to experience nature on a regular basis. And that because of what has happened in our civilization and our society that has brought us away from that, has pushed us more inside or on our phones or what have you, that has taken us away from that natural state of human nature connection. It has made us sicker. It's made the world sicker, the earth sicker. So everything that we do is rooted in this importance of bringing the human back to nature, reconnecting. So there are a lot of very important environmental organizations that are interested in restoration and protection of our lands and waterways and the species that we share this planet with. And we are totally in sync with that, but we are interested in the health and wellness of humans and the users of those spaces being healed by nature, and in turn being able to see the ways that they need to protect this resource that we've been given, this gift.
Well, it occurs to me that as you explain that to all of us right now, that makes complete sense.
Yes.
Yeah, you've made it very explicit in a way that makes sense. I suspect that there are a lot of people who would enter one of these sacred spaces and they kind of have that feeling, but maybe don't know how to articulate it. Clearly, this is not the same as a park or just sort of a green space that has been left to grow on its own. But I'm wondering about ways to facilitate this awareness and to kind of name it and bring it out into the open. And because the lab is all about chaplaincy, and you mentioned programming earlier, I'm wondering what kind of a role could chaplains have in a space like this? A really easy example off the top of my head is a university chaplain could have any number of programming here. But I don't know if maybe you have any examples of things that have happened already, or what types of things do people program in these spaces that a chaplain might be able to sort of fit into that slot?
Sure. So University of Maryland is actually a really good example of that because the space is right outside of their memorial chapel. So one of our fire souls there is the head of the memorial garden and the memorial chapel. So they program the space a lot, and it's interfaith programs happen there. So programs during Lent, programs for other faiths are occurring in that space, but some programs that are meant to really bring that sort of human nature connection to life that we do are either mindfulness or meditation programs. And one of our mindfulness programs is actually called Nature as a Teacher. So the mindfulness course or class is rooted in using nature as your guide through a mindfulness exercise. Forest bathing is another one of those programs that really bring that human nature connection to life. We've done that in our spaces. Sonic meditation, using sound elements that are made by humans, and then reflecting those elements in being mindful of the sounds that are going on in nature. So a lot of the programs that are done in those spaces are definitely used to sort of bring that to light. And absolutely, the chaplains that we've worked with in our spaces are so helpful in that. And I will say we are always, always, always looking for program guides, teachers in our spaces. So if there are people in your group that are willing to help with that, we would definitely love to share that with our fire souls.
Yeah. As you were just saying all of that, it occurred to me that one group that we know is growing, but doesn't have the same kind of footprint, if you will, as more sort of traditional faith or denominational groups is humanist chaplains. And I'm thinking especially, again, we keep coming back to the university example, but it strikes me that this could be a fantastic space for humanist chaplains to do their work, because in so many cases, they are kind of put on the defensive to explain what they're doing in religious terms. That that obviously that doesn't make sense. That's unfair to make these people defend their work on those grounds. But this is very clearly a way to sort of ground a community in a way that everybody can, in theory, relate to, but especially those who are coming from sort of a humanist philosophy. This is a wonderful sort of space that can be created for them.
Absolutely.
Do we have any more questions? We're getting toward the top of the hour here. I want to make sure we have time for everyone. You have many messages of gratitude if you're looking at the Q&A or the chat. People are just very grateful for all of this.
Thank you all for talking with us about this. I think there's a lot of synergy and a lot of shared interest in the work that we all do.
I think maybe to take away a couple of concrete thoughts is, if people have this kind of nation idea of we need some kind of space wherever I am, and I have no concrete examples. I'm totally thinking this up. What are some sort of questions that they should be thinking about now, or how can they get started on that process before contacting you? Just what's the big outline that they should be thinking about?
I think it's important to think, well, there's the sort of more concrete things like, do you own land? Is there something that you could make use of? All those things. Is there water access in the space? That's another fun one. If there's no water in a space, how do you create a garden, which we've done before? And so those are some of the more like, in the weeds kinds of thoughts. But I think what's really important is to envision what sort of solution the space is providing to the community.
Sure.
So in many cases, these sites are used to resolve something, whether it be a tension that's in the community that needs to be addressed, and that can be done really beautifully through a garden design, or just the simple fact that there isn't access to this space, this type of space. Even in a community that has a wealth of recreation sites, ball fields, whatever it is, there might not be a space for people to just go and sort of be in nature, to commune with nature.
Yeah.
And that's really important. Even some of our sites are adjacent to like a playground or a park, and they're meant for, let's say, a caregiver to allow their child to play, and then they come and kind of have this moment of reflection and respite.
Right. Well, thank you. This is fantastic to know that this is happening all over the place. And I'm sure that many of us who are here can think of, half a dozen areas in our locality that this would just be a wonderful thing to have. For those who are still here, I know that we're getting on the top of the hour, so I don't want to keep you for too long. But this webinar is recorded, like all of them, and we send this out with a kind of a very brief survey, a link to the video so that you have it to use for whatever. We'll include links to Nature Sacred so you can see the work that they're doing. A few folks in the Q&A have asked about a directory of where these places are. It's on the Nature Sacred website. It's right there, so you can find out where the closest one is. You can see what kind of work has been done. There's lots of resources there, so I would encourage you all to check that out. I'll give you the last word, Erin. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just thank you so much. And, I appreciate everybody taking the time during what is sort of a troubling time for all of us. And just remember, as you're practicing your social distancing, you can do that beautifully in nature. Don't distance yourself from nature, because it can be healing and restorative at this time. So if you can, get outside.
Yeah. And thankfully, it is now the first day of spring. So for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, I think that's all of us, things are looking to be on the upswing now. So we will look forward to doing that. Thank you so much, Erin, for your time. It's been wonderful to have you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.